As we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I want to share with you a couple of stories that I experienced 5 years ago in my capacity as the chairman of the International Committee on Justice and Peace of the Bishops' Conference of the United States. I had the opportunity to be invited by the bishops of Japan to represent the bishops of the United States at that commemoration. I was honored to be there. It was my first time in Japan, and but I want to share a couple of stories. There were some very beautiful and profound experiences, but a couple of stories that stay with me. One was the recounting of the experience of Sister Lucia. Sister Lucia, 5 years ago, was 80 years old, and she was a survivor of the bombing in Hiroshima, or in Nagasaki, rather. And she recounted that she was in third grade at that time, and she had arrived at school and had gone into her classroom and was seated together with her classmates. And it was mid-morning when suddenly the sky went dark. It went dark, and suddenly they heard this profound explosion that shook the entire building. They weren't sure what was happening. The classroom went dark. There was smoke and dust everywhere, such that Sister Lucia was not able to see anything. Then suddenly she saw a streak of blue and green across the sky that appeared, and then it vanished. And then again, everything fell silent. Everything was still dark. Dust, smoke in the air, darkness. She was not able to see anything. She heard nothing. She decided to get up from her desk and to walk out of the classroom. She described that because it was the custom to remove their shoes at the entrance of the building, she was barefoot, and remembered the glass, the shattered glass across the floor, and how it cut her bare feet. Nonetheless, she was able to manage her way, even in the dark, in the midst of dust and smoke, through the hallway out into the open air. There was dust and smoke in the air, and she saw other people staggering in tatters. Their flesh was burnt. Their hair was disheveled, as well as whatever remained of their clothes. She later would discover that she had survived the atomic bomb in Nagasaki. She later would discover that she was the only person in her classroom who survived. She realized later that it was a blessing, that she was not able to see anything as she opened her eyes after that blast, because all of her classmates, and the teacher included, were essentially pulverized in an instant. As I've heard from physicists and scientists, they still can't quite explain how one person can survive and others be completely obliterated by the power and the action of an atomic bomb. Another story that I share with you that impacted me profoundly was the experience recounted by an 87-year-old survivor of the bombing in Hiroshima. This gentleman was a 17-year-old mail carrier. He was on his bicycle delivering mail when suddenly he heard a blast that blew him off of his bicycle. He fell to the ground unconscious. When he eventually came to, he lifted himself up as best he could. He was staggering, still stunned by the blast. As he was able to stagger his way and to stand up, he noticed that there was something wrong with one of his arms. He lifted up his arm, and at the risk of the the impactful visuals of this image, I do share it with you, that his flesh had become soupy. He eventually would discover, as he realized something was not right with his back, that the flesh on his back was completely burned off. He would suffer throughout his life with internal injuries. His chest was concaved, and it was still evident as we saw him 70 years later as he recounted his story. He was not able to extend that one arm completely. He suffered throughout his life with those effects. These are the people who survived. Of the hundreds of thousands whose lives were lost in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 75 years ago. I share these stories of survivors as we recall with sadness, with profound sobriety, the use of atomic bombs 75 years ago. And that the world has said, as St. John Paul II, when he visited Hiroshima many years ago, never more. Never more. And those are words that are repeated constantly in Japan. Those are words that are repeated by the church today. Never more. Never more may the world ever contemplate using atomic bombs, nuclear bombs. It was just a few years ago, about 5 years ago, that the Vatican clarified its teaching on the development, on the stockpiling, and use of nuclear weapons. That not only is the use of nuclear weapons unethical and immoral, but even the development and the stockpiling of these weapons of mass destruction, because they are indiscriminate, because they don't have the capacity to distinguish between combatants and civilians. And it is immoral to intend the death, the injury of civilians, those who are not combatants. I have published recently a talk that I gave at the United Nations 5 years ago, around this time, where I clarify that teaching of the Vatican. I invite you to take a look at it. It's very readable, accessible. And may we reflect today, 75 years later, on this profound teaching of the gospel to a life of community, of peace.